Who the hell are you?
You know. You all know exactly who I am. I'm the cook. I'm the man who killed Gus Fring. Now, say my name.
Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
The Cinik Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cinik Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cinik.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Igrihe.
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
IG, did we just forget Kim?
You guys completely suck.
This is the greatest show of all time.
An RV races through the desert and crashes, and your naked man jumps out and grabs a camcorder and says, "My name is Walter Hartwell White. I live at 308 Negro Oil Lane, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 87104. To all law enforcement entities, this is not an admission of guilt." And with that, TV changed forever. This is episode 122 of the Cinik Radio Podcast, and I'm your meth cook, Cinik. Joining me, as always, my co-conspirators, Igrihe, Ryan, and Kim. And on this week's show, we are just mere weeks away from Netflix's El Camino, so we're doing an overview of one of the greatest shows of all time, Breaking Bad. So if you like this episode, like, listen, subscribe, but more importantly, don't try this at home. IG, whenever we step in the Wayback Machine, this is always my go-to question. At what point did you pick up Breaking Bad?
Well, I kind of got glimpses of it, a little bit here and there through the first couple of seasons, but I didn't sit down and actually start watching it until after the first two seasons had passed. And then just something clicked in me and said, give this a shot. So loaded up the on-demand service and started looking and started with episode 1. And a couple days later, I'm fully caught up because I just was binging on it because it was unexpectedly good. Like I like the guy that plays Walter White, Bryan Cranston. I remember him in Malcolm in the Middle. I thought that show was great, and I thought maybe it was going to be some of that nonsense going on. And then I got into it, and it was nothing like that. It wasn't even close to that. So I really got drug in very quickly. But it took me until the third season, or the beginning of the third season, when they were throwing all the advertisements on AMC for me to jump in.
Well, back then, nobody was really watching AMC. Why would you watch AMC? They had nothing. So I actually came to the party late. There was this streaming service called Justin TV that Twitch bought and completely ruined. But what they would do is you could get a channel where they would play something like Breaking Bad 24/7, and it would just be episode after episode. And that's how I caught up. But I think I came in around season 2 somewhere, but I caught up within a matter of a day or two of all the content. How about you, Ryan?
It was a show that I'd seen advertisements. I'd heard over the years that it was critically acclaimed. And I want to say it was around season 5 or 6 that we finally sat down and watched it. And it was kind of one of those things. I don't know what streaming service it was on, but it was on some streaming service. And I think it was like seasons 1 to 4 were on whatever the service was. And, initially my wife did not like it. And we got in like 3 to 4 episodes in, and she was not having it. And I was almost and I was loving it, but it was one of those where I was going to have to just find time to watch it on my own. And somewhere around episode 6 or 7, it clicked for her. And then we I think watched it over the course of like a week. We'd watched all of it. And then it got to the point where there was still 1 or 2 seasons worth of episodes that we couldn't watch. And so I forget if I either downloaded it illegally or like ordered it illegally. Somehow I got the episodes because I couldn't find it and I couldn't buy it. And I finished binging, up to season 6 or whatever, in a very short period of time. But yeah, it was one of those shows that once it got going, like I couldn't stop.
How about you, Kim?
We actually fell bass backwards into the show and didn't watch Breaking Bad until it had already completed its run on TV. We had started with Better Call Saul, just being, Bob Odenkirk fans. Then it was like, okay, this isn't making sense. There's a lot of things that seem like it's, out of place or whatnot. And we were sitting down and chewing the fat with some of our friends, and they're like, oh my God, how have you not watched this yet? And so we just sat down and kind of like you guys, we started binge watching it, and probably not within a week, but probably over the course of a month, we were, fully caught up with the entire series and fully invested in the storyline of, Walter White and his entire brigade of shenanigans. It's so well done and such a well-written show. It was so good.
Yeah, nobody at my job had started watching it, and they were going into the last season, and I was just talking about it over and over again, like how great it is, how it hasn't lost steam in 5 seasons, and it's only getting better. You know, I got just about everybody at work watching it going into so it was great to discuss episode from episode during season 5 as it was coming to a close, and I actually even had a party at my house for the finale, which was well worth it. Ryan, we're all around the same general age, or at least I like to tell myself that. And we all grew up and were fans of Malcolm in the Middle. But Bryan Cranston, the goofy dad on that show, did you ever think that he had that kind of darkness inside him?
No, not at all. In fact, I don't know that I was a big fan of Malcolm in the Middle, but I didn't know Bryan Cranston as an actor. I knew him as the dad in Malcolm in the Middle. I probably didn't give the actor a second thought over the years. I remember watching the first couple episodes of Breaking Bad, thinking he looks familiar, but I don't know who this is. And I forget if it was an article or somebody mentioned it. But once I put 2 and 2 together, it was like, oh my God, it's A, I can't believe I didn't realize it, but B, how the hell is that the same actor? Because it's just such a different character. But it was mind-boggling that he could kind of embody that role so much, just considering that he was the goofy dad from Malcolm in the Middle for so long.
How different would the show would have been if they actually cast Matthew Broderick, who was up for the role of Walter White? I don't know if the show would have made it the way it was. What do you think, IG?
I think there's no way. I think Matthew Broderick, as fun as I've seen him in a lot of different things, I guess most importantly, where a little bit of darkness might show would be the movie Election with Reese Witherspoon. And the thing is his darkness still has kind of a goofy, witty sense of humor and everything, where he's kind of that every guy kind of bumbling through things, and that doesn't fit real well in this role. So I think in hindsight, like the casting of Bryan Cranston in this and his acting ability really shone through, and it was a perfect choice. And again, if your only exposure was Malcolm in the Middle to Bryan Cranston before this, there's no way you think that, hey, a dark, gritty former science teacher that now has cancer who's going to start cooking meth to support his family, like that's not going to work with Malcolm in the Middle's dad. It's not. It's just silly. But it turns out to be just amazing. It's probably one of the best casted things I've ever seen.
Well, the only way Matthew Broderick could ever be scary is if he's drunk and behind the wheel of a car, because he actually killed somebody. Look it up. Kim, you're a genius chemist, and you find out that you're terminally ill. It's well within your capabilities to get rich cooking crystal meth. Would you do it? And was Walter White wrong?
Would I do it? No. For him, I think it was, the inner struggle of he wanted to do well for his family. He maybe thought it was just going to be something short term and he would get in, get out, resolve this hurdle he had to get over in the beginning. And then you can't, you just, there is no dipping your toes into the water when it comes to something like that. You're either in it or you're not. And before you know it, you're taking a swan dive into just fully engrossed into this lifestyle. And, you kind of see how that progresses, through the seasons of the downward spiral of, how inundated he is with becoming this drug cartel of his own. One of the things I saw on, oh goodness, I forgot who posted it on YouTube, but they were talking about even the color choices of his clothing from season to season just gradually got darker and darker until he was wearing mostly dark grays and blacks in the final season. Little details about just the whole show is just so good. Would I do it? No. But for Walter White, I think for him it was, something that he thought would probably be a quick fix.
Well, Ryan, one of the things that you like to go to is the character's motivation. And we find out kind of later in the seasons or later in the show that he was part of a corporation that turned into a $1 billion entity in gray matter. And his good friends Gretchen and Elliot were still in charge of it. Do you think a lot of it was his motivation being hubris over the fact that he walked out and lost this opportunity?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's one of the things that makes the character so interesting is his own journey. I think initially you think it's just about the family. And I don't know, it's been a while since I've read, interviews with the writer and kind of his own mindset going in. So I'm not sure if like that was the idea the whole time, or if that's something that developed later. But it's still one of the brilliant aspects of the character is that he starts off where you think you know what his motivation is, and it's kind of this somewhat altruistic, but really it's you can sympathize with him because he's trying to do it for his family. But then you learn, no, there's more to this. It seems to be a little bit more about him and about his own growing power. But then there does seem to be this bit of hubris and this almost, his attempt to show that he was every bit as good as them and that he could do as well as them, sure, by kind of more nefarious means, but still that he was every bit as good. So yeah, it was this kind of constant evolution of his character throughout that really makes it interesting and made the character interesting and helped it from not getting stale, because those motivations were always kind of fluid. It was always kind of changing a little bit. And you saw that, that kind of heel turn that really it cements itself as you get towards him, but you understand more about the character. And so it was really one of the great things about the, one of the great aspects of the kind of writing of the show.
IG Jesse Pinkman, aka Captain Cook. I always found him just smart enough to be dangerous, but no one suffered more tragedy throughout the run of the series, from the loss of his bathtub to his freedom. What was it about Jesse's character that kept him teaming up with Walt? And how different would the show have been if they would have wrote him off after one season like they planned?
I honestly think the show wouldn't have done as well or been as intriguing without Jesse. Aaron Paul did a great job in playing basically your street thug that learned how to, at a very base level, cook some meth. And I mean, he was doing stupid things like putting pepper in it and everything because he was making it special and
chili pea, yo.
Yeah. It was just weird, and that's fine. It's not the first person in the history of time to ever take a drug and do something to it to try and give it their own spin so that they can sell it. I mean, if you look at these states with legalized marijuana now, they've got like all kinds of goofy names like Grape Ape and White Unicorn and all this stuff because they're trying to build a brand with something. And that's exactly what Jesse was doing, which in turn helped build the business for Walter, right? So without him there, he was more of a marketing genius than anybody gave him credit for. And I think it really helped build his meth empire having Jesse there, because especially in the earlier seasons, Jesse was a lot of no fucks given kind of guy. And that's kind of what you need in this type of world. And quite honestly, early on in the series, that's not what Walter was. Walter was an egghead, and he was trying to get the purest meth you could get, and he was doing it like way more than anybody had ever even gotten close to, which made it a desirable product. And Jesse had the ability to get that product in the street and into the hands of other people, much to their own dismay, because that got them in a lot of trouble in a lot of places. But that being said, Jesse was integral. If you'd have taken him out at the end of season 1 and just kind of focused on Walter and not had Jesse's story going on with all this stuff and everything he had to go through, this show would have been just a run-of-the-mill nothing thing that AMC may still not be in anybody's mindset. Really, this show is what brought AMC to the forefront of cable television.
Might even been why they took a chance on something like The Walking Dead after so many other networks turned them down. Yeah, I agree with you there, IG. I don't think it's the same show if you take Aaron Paul after one season. One of the biggest or most compelling facets of the story was the struggle between Walter and Jesse and them trying to be, frenemies and fighting each other and then getting back together and working together. I mean, it became almost like a buddy comedy, and so to speak, in certain points with the way that they would treat each other. So I don't think the show would have been as good. Ryan, Jesse was young, reactionary, not always a deep thinker, and a meth addict. What was it about Walt that kept him so close and kept him teaming with him after so many other people warned him, this kid can't be trusted?
I don't know. Maybe it's the son that he couldn't have or didn't have. Obviously
he had Walt Jr.
Yeah, no, he did have Walt Jr., but maybe there was something missing in that relationship that, he couldn't showcase that part of him. Maybe it was like, or as a teacher, it was the student that he couldn't get through to, that he's finally getting through to. So I don't know what there was, or maybe it was that, again, that was his kind of his gateway into that world. And maybe he was the one person he felt kind of comfortable and safe with. And so in a weird way, like he needed Jesse there, I don't know. I'm not, I don't know that there was a noble reason, but there definitely was, something about having Jesse. He needed Jesse there. He could never quite get rid of it. I don't know. There are any number of angles that you could take with it. Clearly, he couldn't quit, having Jesse around.
It was almost like a boss lackey type situation, or a father son where I'm in charge. And who do you think, Ryan? Do you think that Walt needed Jesse, or do you think Jesse needed Walt more?
I think both. I think there was a codependency there, that they both seemed to need the other person around. I think Jesse needed that father figure, and again, I think Walt needed that kind of son / lackey / person to almost look up to him in a weird way, and it was almost like a validation for him. So I think that they both kind of, given the circumstances, they were really needed and relied on having each other around.
Kim, we talked about the dark clothes, but also once Walt shaved his head, put on that hat and the black shades, he became Heisenberg. Do you think that flipped the switch and it was the beginning of him Breaking Bad?
Absolutely. I think that was him kind of starting to embrace that persona that he knew he needed to separate his personal life from this new, professional life. It sure as hell ain't teaching. So, he had to kind of rebrand himself, not just for the product that they were trying to push in the streets with it being such a superior product and everybody wanting it, but he needed to, kind of individualize himself, his look, and not make it so obvious to, friends or family, or God forbid he run into a potential coworker or something like that from the school he used to work at or had been working at that was also buying drugs from him. So, yeah, I think it was a necessary evil. And I think it was, part of that mental gameplay that happens. They say when people go through cancer, they get something like chemo brain. Their thoughts and everything just kind of get a little bit more jumbled. And, maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe it didn't. But I think it was an interesting way to see Bryan Cranston just fully flip the switch, not just on the Heisenberg role, but from where everybody else used to know him, and see how dynamic of an actor he actually is. He was just so great for this part.
I was never really buying the hat, but I mean, the look did work for him. It worked for him because he was bald and he had the kick-ass goatee. My thing is, you take a man who's obviously brilliant and you minimize him in every way possible, at home, at work. I mean, he's got a second job where he's wiping down the tires of his student's car. At some point, if he has a chance to take his power back, he's probably going to. And the harder you push somebody down and throw cancer on top of it, the more he's going to push back. And when he pushed back, it was in a big way. IG, let's talk about one of my favorite villains on the show. Tuco's run on the show was way too short, in my opinion. He was dangerous, psychotic, and deathly unpredictable. He beat Jesse with a bag of money. He beat one of his own men to death just for talking back. And then he kidnaps Walt and Jesse. Realistically, though, if you look at it from Jesse and Walt's perspective, how can you have a working business relationship with a nut job like this? I mean, can it go any place but bad?
And that's the thing. I think they were kind of backed into a corner because Tuco, if I recall correctly, was a guy running most of the meth trade in Albuquerque at the time. So you were kind of stepping on his toes. But you're stepping on his toes with a better product. It's like, somebody selling Zenith brand TVs and Sony shows up. Except Zenith is holding on all the cards here and starts to break all your fucking fingers. So you kind of got to do what you're doing to put a Zenith brand on all your Sony TVs and deal with the devil. And that's great, right? But it's going to go bad, because if a guy's going to beat his own guy to death for talking back, like, where's the line? Like, what can you get away with? What can you even say to him, even if he's wrong? You can't say anything. You just got to do whatever he says and just deal with the consequences, unless you're smart enough to off him very quietly. Which, that's kind of Walter's thing, man. He can just make some stuff happen.
Yeah, or definitely just schedule all your meetings at El Taco, where he can't beat you to death without no provocation. Ryan, Agent Hank Schrader was a big fish in a little pond. He killed Tuco. I mean, he killed the cousins that attacked him, and he didn't even have a weapon, in separate firefights, but completely loses his nerve in El Paso. What do you make from all that? He's in a life-threatening situation, and he fights back, and he wins. 2 times in a row. I mean, against opponents that probably should have beat him. But then he sees someone blown up and he completely loses his shit and he's pretty much done for the run of the show.
I've never been, in that type of a situation. And maybe it can speak more towards that being, military. I guess there are some things that just flip a switch, in the brain and or that change your perspective. But yeah, it's like kind of a shock. In a way, maybe it makes sense because like his character was kind of always built as somebody who does kind of is kind of that cocky, you can imagine him being like the jock in high school, that kind of obnoxious, loud jock in high school, and someone who's maybe probably was braggadocious and maybe a little more confident in his abilities. And obviously he's very good at what he does, but something like that, maybe just flip the switch. I'm sure he's somebody who's been through and seen a lot. And so, I'm sure there is like a fine line between, managing and seeing stressful and depressing and awful situations, and then kind of seeing something that just has a real effect on you. But you're right. It did seem to kind of shut him down for the rest of the series.
What bothered me about that as well was his inability to even say anything to anybody. That actually hurt me for him. He had a dysfunctional relationship with his wife, but he still couldn't say to anybody, I don't want to go back there. It's a goddamn war zone. It kind of made Hank a little bit more of a likable and sympathetic character where, usually when he's on screen, even from the first episode, he was just a colossal jerk off. Kim, sometimes you need a lawyer that you can trust. In enters a snappy dressing, fast talking criminal lawyer. And I do mean criminal. Saul Goodman. Did Bob Odenkirk play this role so well he almost made being an ambulance chaser cool again? And what were your thoughts on Saul Goodman?
I loved this character a whole lot. Probably my favorite of the show outside of the obvious main, 2 runners. If pardon the expression, but if you're looking for a cheese stick car salesman, he's your guy. And he just played it so well. And I don't know if that's part of the comedy background versus, whatever, but I enjoyed it. And I think it was a fabulous hire for this particular role. And even in the spinoff show, I thought was just hilarious. I enjoyed every freaking second of it.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that we bring up often that just chews up scenery. I interviewed Nadine Marissa a while back, and she was the law clerk. But she worked behind the counter and she cut the checks for the state when somebody would represent defendants. And she said that he couldn't have been a sweeter and nicer guy to her. And she just kept making him laugh because they got in an argument over his pay in one of the episodes. And she was, she basically told him, one defense, no matter how many defendants, you get the same amount. And he started yelling at her. But she said that was her first role ever on screen. And Odenkirk could have been more complimentary and sweet and kind to her and kind of walked her through it. And she was so thankful for getting a chance to work with him. IG, throughout the course of the show, we had a lot of characters come and go because, frankly, people didn't last long on the show. But did anyone make as much of an impact story-wise than the wisecracking, cynical Jane? Her death basically changed Walt and Jesse forever.
And, when you put people like her on screen, where they make such an impact on you, it's really bad when they leave. Because we're always looking for a replacement then. We're looking for someone to take that spot up. And one of the genius things they did is they didn't replace it. They didn't put someone else to take that spot. They didn't give someone else wisecracking stuff to do. It just left. And while many shows always look to replace one cog with another because it's working, this one saw the logic and the just ability to see that replacing it lessens the show. This is one of the very few shows that as it went on didn't have very terrible seasons because a lot of things will just replace things with something else because, we need this part, we need that part, we need someone to crack wise, we need someone to be stupid, we need someone to look tough. And they didn't keep that trope going and everything with this season. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like that changed Jesse and Walt's life. Having her not be there, having her die, and not putting something else in place, I think kept the show going strong through all of its seasons.
Well, they do that with Walking Dead. If Rick goes, well, who's going to be the next Rick? Who's going to be the leader? In Jane's case, though, Kim, who do you think that impacted more? Do you think it impacted Jesse's character or Walt's?
I feel like it may have impacted Waltz more. You know, if you look at his home life as a whole, right, he was kind of failing at paying attention to his family. He really wasn't as attentive as he should have been, like season 2, season 3. You know, and then he forms this new bond, this new family, as if he can, you know, kind of get things right later on. And watching her die, it was like he felt helpless, I guess. There was nothing he could really do. He didn't know what to do. And I feel like it probably impacted him a little bit more than it would have Jesse's character. Or Aaron's character, Jesse. You know, that's kind of the game you play when you mess around with drugs is, you know, that it's like a game of Russian roulette. You don't know if you're going to, you know, choke on your own vomit, you know, while you're sleeping or whatever, or if you're ever even going to wake up. So, you know, it's the consequences of the actions that he chose to make, I guess is what I'm getting at. And he chose this path that he started to embrace. He's become the Heisenberg. He is this, you know, powerful, prominent man who's hiding money in barrels all over the, you know, the desert. And then he sees somebody close to him die as a result of using products. I don't want to say drugs. I don't want to, you know, over glamorize that, but I think that may have hit home for him. Like, you know, what if that was his son? You know what I mean?
Jane's death really was a turning point in the show because it impacted Jesse, and your heart went out for him when he just kept calling your voicemail and listening and hanging up, and to the point where they shut the phone off. But in my opinion, this was the first inherently evil thing that Walt did, because I kind of disagree a little bit. I think he could have done something and he chose not to. He sat there and he kind of watched it happen because it was in his own interest, because Jane had basically threatened to blackmail him and he didn't want to lose Jesse, and he didn't want her outing him because then, you know how unpredictable addicts could be. I think that was one of the biggest events in the show's run. Hats off to Kristen Ritter for that performance, because for the short amount of time she was on the show, she really made a huge impact in my mind. Ryan, Saul sets up a meeting with the biggest meth player in town, which turns out to be chicken expert Gus Fring, local restaurateur. His first inclination was to turn tail and run from Walt and Jess, and he turned them down. Do you think all parties would have been better off if he would have stuck to his guns and not gotten into this business relationship? Because in the end, they undid everything.
I guess it depends on who you're rooting for. If you're rooting for Gus, yeah. If you're rooting for Walt and Jesse, you know, what you would have to think that. I mean, I guess I don't know that they would have the infrastructure to build this massive empire. So I guess the question is, would they have been enemies with Gus? Because I think that, you know, had they gone toe to toe with Gus, they, you know, just seeing Gus's resources and just how evil he can be when he needs to, I don't think Walt or Jesse would have been long for the world. So I guess it's all perspective. If you're Gus, yeah, probably a bad idea. But if you're Walt and Jesse, you're kind of counting your blessings that you did get that chance, because I don't think they would want him as an enemy.
As meth cooks or producers, Kim, the struggle is real. We've seen it with Jess and Walt. They had a golden opportunity of a secure location. You come to work, you cook your meth, you make millions, no risk. Gus incurs it all. What was it about the two of them that they just couldn't play by the rules? I mean, Walt was fine with it at first, but then Jesse started kind of lighting the load and selling the meth on the side. And then when Walt was told, all right, we're going to have to get rid of Jesse, he completely bucked, even though he didn't need him anymore.
I don't know if it's just general paranoia. You know, like, this guy has all my secrets. He knows everything that my trade, you know, he's a major cog in my wheel and I need that. And you kind of become dependent, not just on the drugs, but you become dependent on the individuals that are helping you create this so-called empire. Yeah, I don't know if it's just paranoia or not.
IG, is there a better argument for there are no real friends at work than poor Gale? I mean, could he have been the nicest drug manufacturer in the world, yet he's great to Walt? He gives him the world's best cup of coffee for all his trouble, for being a good coworker, and trying to worship Walt for everything he is. He takes a bullet in the face.
And that's the problem. Like, Gale was like probably the best lab assistant a scientist could ever hope for. And somehow he gets drug into let's cook meth. And great. Okay, because he's just as good at it, if not 100 times better than Jesse because he knows what he's doing. You don't have to hold his hand through everything. But the difference is he knows what he's doing. And maybe that's not what Walter needed. Walter needed somebody that he could guide and teach and hold their hand and feel like he was doing something other than just making the world's best methamphetamine, which is what he was doing, but he was doing it with somebody that needed him when he was doing it with Jesse, and Gale didn't need him. So you run into this other problem where the codependence that we talked about earlier isn't really being dealt with because Walter doesn't need Gale because he knows everything that he needs to do to build this. And Gale doesn't really need Walter once he gets the method down. Once he has taken all the notes and done everything, he can make meth on his own. So there's a problem here. So one of them is going to have to die. And since this is Breaking Bad and about Walter White, not Game of Thrones, it's going to be Gale.
Well, I think part of it, too, was that Jesse would always need Walt. I don't think he could ever really go out on his own and produce the same thing. However, Gale was smart enough and trained enough that he could have been Walt given the right amount of time, and Walt couldn't put up with that. There's no way that somebody was going to cook his formula as good as Walt. So yeah, Gale had to go. Unfortunately, after Gale died, Ryan, they forced Fring's hand to keep both Walt and Jesse alive. Poor Victor paid the price as Gus calmly walks down the stairs, changes his clothes without saying a word, and uses a box cutter to just slice Victor's throat. If you're one of the dynamic duo, whether it be Walt or Jesse, do you say to yourself, maybe it's time we quit? Maybe it's time we move away. Maybe we should just behave and not give Gus any more trouble?
Yeah, that was like a pivotal moment in the show. I think for one is you realize just how great of a villain and how menacing and terrifying of a villain Gus is. And yeah, I think it was a brilliant scene just because I think everyone plays a role perfectly. Gus, you could tell, is just angry and he's going to show them a lesson. And, I think Walt and Jesse are just shocked, by just how brutal he could be. And you kind of can see in their faces how it was the regret for their actions, and for the many, like they had it made, they had a perfect setup, and to screw that up, I think you could tell in that scene that every party was really upset that they had allowed themselves to get into that position.
Kim, the game of cat and mouse between the cartel and Gus gets turned up to 11 as Jesse is shipped to Mexico to become their personal cook. Gus goes to the extent of poisoning himself, and Mike is shot to get back at the cartel. They probably would have died right there, but Jesse stepped in and saved them both. Were you screaming at your TV during that episode like I was? Why didn't you just let them die? Your problems would have been solved.
Tequila. That's all I gotta say. It's deadly if you drink it regular. It's deadly if you drink it from Gus. I found myself just absolutely bitter and angry for no apparent reason. It's a fictional story, but here I am in my living room at 2:00 in the morning, pissed.
I was much like Walt. I'm like, because Walt's like, you saved them? We just watched this guy kill somebody else with a box cutter. We're probably next. And you raced to save his life? That's insane. That was one of the few flaws in the story that I kind of, I had a problem with, because anybody with half a brain, even Jesse, would have been like, okay, well, I could just dump these guys out of the car and drive away and good. IG, after Gus threatens Walt's family, he decides to get out in front of it and builds himself a bomb. He uses Tio Salamakia as bait. Was this one of the most gruesome deaths of all time? And where do you rank Gus as far as villains in TV lore?
Gus is pretty high up there. Like, he's doing real well. I would imagine that he'd be pretty close to on par with Negan. I think he was calculating. I think he was smart. I think he ran a great empire, and he was making good money on chicken alone. Imagine how much more money he was making on meth. Gus was amazing, and I really loved the character, and the same guy is going to show up in The Mandalorian in little over a month from now, so I'm excited to see him there. Great actor. Great job in this role, and Gus was just eerie, and I loved the way that they played that character. And Salamanca, like with his little bell on his thing, dinging his way through life to let people know that he was there, basically. And that death of Gus Fring in that episode was so gruesome and so awesome all at the same time. It would be zombie kill of the season on Breaking Bad Walking Dead for sure, because like half of his body just burned away and just like skeleton and everything, and he was still standing there and tightening his tie and stuff.
Just a socket of an eye.
And it was so cool. And like nothing, at least as far as television goes, had been anywhere close to that thus far. So they spent some money on some effects to make that happen. And this was not an effects-laden show. So when you spend money on effects like that, you know that they're really trying to sell it. And I really appreciated it. It really kind of got me even more invested emotionally in this show, because if you're willing to go that far and blow somebody up that way, and basically you took care of multiple problems by convincing one of your problems to blow up the other one. It was really just poetry as far as television goes. And this show had quite a bit of it. It's an epic poem for sure.
Well, they brought in Greg Nicotero for The Walking Dead for that, so that's why some of that was so good. But there was a hot second in that sequence of events where Gus gets up and kind of walks out of the room, and you're like, oh man, Walt missed his shot. And then he just slightly turns his body, and you see that, half of Gus is no longer there. It couldn't have been more perfectly done. You'll just never see a better death on TV than that. Ryan, after poisoning Brock, letting Jane die, and blowing up Gus in half a nursing home, we get a sequence of events out in the desert, and I call it the Say My Name conversation. He's in a meeting with some new buyers. At that point, do you think Walt was all in? I mean, he's talking to other drug dealers and bragging about the fact that I'm the man that killed Gus Fring. I'm the best meth cook in the Southwest. Now say my name.
That's the beginning and the end for Walt as a character. I think that there's the hubris, because I think, yes, he's got the best product out there, but at the end of the day, like if you're a dealer, you care about quality of your product so much as it's gonna hook people, but that's about it. Yes, he'd end up killing Gus Fring, and he'd done a lot, but he wasn't a hardened criminal, and he wasn't a terrifying person. And so he was getting by on this kind of persona, and he was kind of getting by on this, but the reality is, like, he was not that person. But by presenting yourself as that, you run the risk of running into people who are that tough and who don't care and who will kill you. And so, I think that kind of starts the beginning and the end of that character. It was badass, and he had some amazing, just badass moments towards the end, but at the end of the day, for that character, like that's really not who he is. And he was at that point buying into his own aura, and again, that kind of spells the beginning of the end for that character.
Yeah, from a bomb at a distance, he's a dangerous guy. But if anybody came up on Walt, and wanted a physical confrontation, he's not going to do much. I mean, Jesse, who's a much lighter guy, took him to school a few times when they tussled. So yeah, he was building that I'm the biggest, baddest on the block, but he couldn't really back that up. Kim, after Gus, the boys go back into business for themselves with the help of Mike. As interesting in twists as the last season was with the train robbery and the vomitous paths, they're great meth cooks. Nobody can deny that. But were they terrible criminals? After all this, all the meth, the millions of dollars made, does it always feel like they were one step forward and two step back? At the end of it, they were all virtually broke going into the season.
And looking at it as a whole, they weren't actual drug dealers. They were never really meant to be that. They never, even though they kind of slid into that dark gray area with being phenomenal chefs, if you will, for a long period of time, at the core of things, it's not who they are. I don't want to say they never really truly fully succumbed to, that lifestyle. And I think as the series goes on and things happen, Jane's death and Gus, and that skull, man, that's like pierced in my brain just seeing that. But, as these events and things like that are happening, it's like a reminder, like, oh yeah, I got to step back just a little bit. So you're right. Yeah, they may take 2 steps forward, but they're always going to take 3 or 4 backwards. They never really truly made progress. And if you're, in the meth game and that's what you're doing and you're making buku bucks and you still end up piss broke, then you're a terrible drug dealer.
Well, I don't know about great drug dealers out there just rolling in cash. That doesn't tend to be how that works. Most of them get caught, go to prison, everything else. And then that's the difference between these guys and the normal drug dealers have fights on the street. Some of them die, everything moves on. Some of them go to jail, everything moves on. This one, he just went through many years of killing other people until he couldn't kill other people anymore. And I don't know. I think that he was Breaking Bad all the way through. And he was attempting to do it for a very noble cause at the beginning. But that cause got away from him very quickly when he saw how much money he could make and how quickly he could make it. So it turned from, let's take care of my family and make sure I can pay my medical bills, to I can run an empire and be filthy rich and launder it all through a car wash. And that just turned out to not really be all that true.
Well, IG, Gail has the last laugh. We find out that taking notes during a criminal conspiracy probably isn't the best idea. Hank uses the bathroom at Walt's house and finds a note in a book that Gail left for him, which turned out to be the same note in a notepad they found at Gail's apartment. And he finds out that Walt is in fact Heisenberg. At that point, with the way that Hank was all in on trying to find Heisenberg, did you feel that there was any way that Walt gets away after Hank was on his scent?
I think that the only way that Walter would have gotten out of that was somebody has to kill Hank. Like, quite honestly, one of the two of them is going to die, or Hank or Walt is going to prison. And turns out I was right. You know, somebody's going to die, and it's going to be Hank. And how do you kill your brother-in-law? How do you do that and everybody's going to be okay with it? Like, you're going to have to live with that and look your wife and your sister-in-law in the face day after day if you continue to try and live a normal life, knowing that you had destroyed one of their families. So it just really isn't a good situation to be in. And that's the thing, is he got so full of himself. The hubris was so deep that he just really thought that I can do this and I'm going to continue making money, making meth, doing everything because no one can stop me. And that's a real problem. Like, if your brother-in-law is in the DEA, he picked the wrong thing to make. I mean, make the world's best Jolly Ranchers, or like gumdrops or something. Lord have mercy. Don't make meth, because you're going to get caught. It is literally a matter of time until somebody figures it out.
You bring up a good point, IG, but Ryan, is it realistic for Walt to think that I'll just make a confession tape, put it all on Hank's shoulders, and then he'll just leave me alone? At a certain point, Hank was going to have to die, right? Like, he was willing to flush his career to bring Walt in.
Yeah, no, I think there was that conflict set up, and at some point, yeah, that's it. It's like, you've got, I mean, he didn't have much of a choice. It's weird because it's one of those things that was played, kind of developed throughout the entire show, so it was kind of an undercurrent. But then I almost felt it was a little bit rushed, towards the end. But yeah, I do think that at some point he was going to have to die, and I think that's the kind of tragedy of Walt's life, and that's also why I think his the real motivation really wasn't to help the family, because at the end of the day he was going to alienate, doing what was quote right for the family and to protect them was going to alienate everyone around him, end up with his family effectively disowning him, no friends, his brother-in-law dead. It was never going to not end that way. And I think that was a kind of exemplary, or a great example of that. This was the tragedy of his world and of his life and of his hubris, that it was never going to work out. And I guess the moral of the story is don't cook meth, no matter what it'll do for your family.
Kim, Hank plays Walt's greed to perfection, not only drawing him out, but leading him right to where he buried his money in the desert. When it looks like the jig is up, Jack and his men show up and they kill Hank. They kill Steve Gomez, and Jesse is kidnapped, and most of Walt's money is stolen. This was a loss on Walt on every level imaginable. He goes into hiding. He travels across the country, locks himself up in a cabin. But as he was sitting there with the dude from Jackie Brown getting cancer treatments and $10,000 Costco runs, did you think there was any way that he was going to let this stand?
No. The horrible thing about this is they kind of foreshadowed all of this in the very first season. Like, there's a scene where he's leaning on the car, and there's the bullet hole or whatever, and his reflection in it, you see the bullet hole like in his head. There's right before this, there's two guys in the background that are playing chess, and the white pawn or whatever is surrounded by two Black Knights, and it's kind of like, oh, he's losing his empire, it's all collapsing around him and whatnot. And was there a way for him to allow something like that to stand? No. Was he going to make it out of this? Absolutely not. And I think the entire show just kind of led up to the fact that shit's going to hit the fan. It's happening, and I do agree. I feel like for as invested in the show as some people get, I know when I'm watching these things, I'm not paying attention to anything else that's going on around me. I am here for this. Like I feel like I am a part of this. I'm inviting you into my home every single week, and I am occupying my time with this show. And when you get that involved with the storyline, when it's acted out that well, and then it just it does seem a little bit, pushed, like to hurry up and get it done. I felt like for me, it could have been a couple more episodes drawn out, but at the end of the day, it was brilliant. I don't know what else to say about that.
I agree with you. The way that every piece fit together like a perfect puzzle. There were no spare pieces. There was nothing missing at the end. Everything came together the way it was supposed to be, and everything fit together. There was nothing forced, and it turned out to be one complete beautiful picture. I call it Heisenberg's revenge. Walt comes back to Albuquerque in the final episode, makes sure that his money gets to the remaining amount of his money gets to his family, and pays Jack's crew back with the old 50 cal in the trunk routine. Was it a fitting end for Walter White and this amazing series?
I think, quite honestly, it was a really good end, but it's apparently not going to be the total end. Maybe still the end for Walter, maybe not. We've got this movie called El Camino coming out in just a couple of weeks, which is why we're talking about this now, so we can get ready, so we can amp ourselves up so that we can get back into the Breaking Bad universe. Because I know Better Call Saul is in that universe. It's not the same. I love the show, but it's not the same. But for Walter, this is kind of best case scenario. And because what else are you going to do? I mean, you're going to just continue living off the little bit of money that they didn't dig up and you had left. It's not going to care for your family. It's not going to care for your wife. It's not going to care for your son, for your daughter. You need to right all the wrongs. You need to take care of everything that has gone on. And hopefully, in the end, get Jesse out of this, because he wronged Jesse so many times in this episode, in this series. He helped him a lot, but wronged him more than he did right by him. So really the best thing you can do right now as Walter White is to get Jesse out clean. And I think that was what he was able to accomplish mostly in the end, which, you know what? You're going to come back. You're going to take one for the team and take a whole bunch of other guys out with you so Jesse can survive. I'm in it. And I think that while he broke bad for the majority of 5 seasons, right here at the end, I think he finally did some good. And it cost him. It cost him dearly. But, it showed us that all in all, I think Walter White was a good man just with a bad idea.
Well, it cost him everything at the end, but there was no other way out for him to die, because now that once he gets the money solved, it gets the heat off of Skyler. The search is over for him, so his family can kind of go back to normal. I personally would have relocated, but they decided to stay in the same area, which I didn't understand. But Ryan, Jesse escapes the white supremacist, drives off, which leads us to the upcoming El Camino movie, like IG said. I mean, are you excited about new Breaking Bad content? And where do you think that movie is headed?
I have no idea. It looks like it's right in the aftermath. I don't know what to think. I think, like, for example, I wasn't excited about Better Call Saul, and I've only watched two seasons, but it's one of the best shows on TV, and I obviously have a lot to catch up on. But clearly, Vince Gilligan is an amazing writer. And I'm sure he has an amazing team of writers. So I'm not up all night thinking about it like I will be, as episode 9, is coming out, or The Mandalorian, or other things that I'm a really big fan of. And as much as I love the show, I guess I'm not as excited as I should be. But I feel like the show, the movie is going to be great, and we'll probably be here, giving it a fairly high scores. So yeah, it's hard to say, because I feel like they tied up the show so well. And there are times where you don't need to know the aftermath. Like, I don't need to know what happens to Jesse. I know he escaped in that, and he had that last moment of joy. And in some ways that was kind of like, that's all I needed to see. let him figure it out. And with a lot of shows, I think often, they last a little bit longer than they should, trying to give us everything, and we didn't need it. And so, yeah, it's hard to say. Like, I think on one hand, yeah, I love the way it ended. On the other hand, I'm sure they're going to do a great job with the show. So, what I do hope is that I hope that the movie does give us a reason to revisit it, and it's not doesn't just feel like it was thrown out there because they can. So, I guess we'll see in a few weeks.
Well, forever there was rumors of season 6, and I didn't want that because it ended at the perfect point with the perfect ending, and I just don't think you should mess with it. And Seinfeld's on Stern all the time, and he always asks him, like, well, if they offered you $100 million to do a reunion, would you do it? And Seinfeld's like, no, because I feel like we went out on top, and I don't want to mess with, we'll never be able to replicate what we did. So that's my fear with this upcoming movie, is that you're going to somehow change the ending of Breaking Bad in a way that will taint how perfect season 5 was, because season 5 was everything that we hoped season 7 of Game of Thrones would be. It ended on the right notes, and we got everything out of the story that we needed. And I thought it was as near perfect as you're going to get. Kim, your thoughts on the series Breaking Bad and your rating?
I loved this entire series. And it's one of those that I could totally see myself sitting down maybe during the next hurricane scare or something, and just binge watching the crap out of it, because every single time I've sat down and watched it, I've picked up something different that I didn't recognize before. And all the little finite details, like the giant bag of money actually has the characters' faces in it in the last episode. So, there's little things in it. And to put that much detail, it's something that's worthy of being watched more than once. For one, I'm really excited about seeing the new El Camino movie. I think, for me, like I said, I get really invested into these storylines. And when they end, I'm kind of like, oh, it's over now. Crap. What am I going to start watching some Disney show next?
Yes, we're going to watch some Disney show next.
Not The Mandalorian.
Oh,
I was referring to like cartoons and whatnot. But, so for me, whenever something that I'm really into, like I'm really enjoying the acting, the theatrics of it, and then it stops, it kind of sucks, so I do care about what happens to Jesse after he drives off like a madman. I want to see, is he reuniting with Badger and Skinny Pete? I want to know what's going on with kind of those second and third rate characters or whatever that didn't have a huge presence in the show. Like what happened with that? Like I care enough about what's going on with it I need more. You've given me the itch. So for me, the show is a 10. I don't throw that out there too loosely, but it was like a fine orchestra, for the subject matter of it, the way everything just kind of falls into place, the way the storyline it progresses at a good speed. There were very little to no dips where you feel like, oh, this is just a character building episode. Next time it's going to be something interesting. No, it was really freaking good from beginning to end. I loved it, and I'm excited to see El Camino.
Yeah, it's definitely in the pantheon of all-time great shows. And it really, I think it without it, we don't get a lot of the kind of the way what TV's become today. I don't think we get, because I think it really was one of the first kind of bingeable shows, or those first shows that really kind of ushered in this era of us kind of watching, a season in a weekend. But yeah, as a show, it's near perfect. I think it has, it has everything. It's got an amazing premise. It has, probably the best pilot episode of all time. It has, great characters, a great and interesting protagonist who's conflicted and just who develops as well as any character we've ever seen on TV. It has amazing villains and amazing antagonists throughout. And I think more importantly, and I think where, obviously this differs, at least for most of us, when it comes to like Game of Thrones, as I think to me the biggest kind of thing to compare maybe The Sopranos, that you can compare to it as like the greatest shows of all time, especially for like us and people like us. I think that there's a large argument about those shows sticking the landing. Obviously, this one did. I think it almost. I didn't expect the ending to be what it was, and I think going into that season, you don't quite expect it, but it really does stick the landing, and the ending is kind of finite enough, but open ended enough that it really is satisfying, but leaves you, to kind of think about what happens with some of the characters. But yeah, it's a 10 as an overall show. I don't, there really are not many flaws, if any, with it, and if you're looking for them, you're really just nitpicking. But yeah, it's again, in that like top 3 to 5 shows of all time, if not at the very top.
The show is just a beautiful show. And the thing is most of us live in a world where 99% of the people that watch this show are never going to break bad anywhere close to anything they've done here. Like I would feel bad if I walked out of a store without paying something, even if it was unintentional. So to watch this show and get emotionally invested in somebody cooking meth, like I'm not a big, like, I don't use drugs. I don't like to take Tylenol if I can help it. I take the prescription medication that I am told to take or I might die. Other than that, like, I don't like to take drugs. So to get so invested in something like this is just weird. It's odd, but I couldn't help but get drawn in because the characters are so fleshed out, and they don't just spend time fleshing out characters. They let it happen naturally. Everybody is interesting to watch in the show, and they all seem plausible and real. They brought a bunch of people that no one would expect from anywhere out into the forefront, right? Like Bob Odenkirk had been around and done a few things, but this really just blew him up. He's bigger now than he ever had been anywhere before this because of Breaking Bad. Bryan Cranston has gotten so many more roles in his life, and he's not pigeonholed into having to be a comedic actor, but he still does some comedic acting, which gives him just so many things he can do. His role in Trumbo was, I'm sure, just because he was able to do this stuff in Breaking Bad. And Jesse Pinkman, like, there is no more adequate character than that, as far as kind of I was a loser in high school that just kind of got by on being kind of just off and cool and weird and strange, and now I'm trying to make my own meth, and it was just weird. Like, this was casted beautifully, written so well. There hasn't been previously or since something, I think, that has consistently been as strong, and it did the right thing. And like, we're going to do 5 and out. And I wish more shows that do well would learn from this and do 3 to 5 seasons, get out and be great. And that's what they did here. Breaking Bad is quite simply one of, if not the best show ever produced for television. And it didn't get its just desserts all the way through. It did do well. It got some awards and it earned some things, and it really set the pace for some of these people to get more work later and really jumpstart their careers into places they probably never thought they'd get. I'm really a fan of this show, and I'm glad that I picked it up when I finally did. I'm glad I finally gave it a shot, because I'm one of those people that I tend to kind of stay in my little wheelhouse of sci-fi and other things, and this really got me open to looking at other shows, this and The Wire and other things like that. They are things that you need to watch, and if you haven't watched, give it a shot, because Breaking Bad is great. It's great writing. It's great cinematography. Everything about it is great. If you haven't seen it, watch it and then get ready for El Camino. I, as well, will give it a 10.
Well, we're in full agreement. And what other show has a character named Spooge getting killed by getting crushed by an ATM on its head? There is no way that we could possibly do this show justice at all in one episode of our podcast. This is just one of these ones that I loved writing. It's a once in a lifetime show. And I would go back, if these guys are willing, and review every single episode, all amazing 62 episodes of the show, because like they said previously, there wasn't a bad episode ever. I don't know another show I could say that about. You know, it's sort of like a band, your favorite band and your favorite album of all time. There's not a bad song. There's not a filler song. That was Breaking Bad to me. Every single episode mattered. Firstly, Vince Gilligan is an absolute genius, and they continue to show that on Breaking Bad's sister show, Better Call Saul. Not only is the show getting better per episode and per season, it's just getting stronger, and I have a feeling it's going to end just as strong. This show just pointed out that you never know how good an actor is until they find the perfect role. And to Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul, we're lucky enough to find that in Walt and Jesse Pinkman. If they never work again, they've become instant icons as far as Hollywood and as far as television. You just don't get better fits. The supporting cast, including Bob Odenkirk, Dean Norris, Jonathan Banks, Giancarlo Esposito, were nothing less than brilliant every single time they were on the screen. The story was perfect. It was heartbreaking. It was slick. It was told in detail. And this everyday teacher minimized throughout life and sickness, embraced his dark side, and became the man that so many people wish they could. The absolute best anti-hero of all time. I give Breaking Bad a 10.
And that's it. You made it to the end of another episode of the Cinik Radio podcast. I'm Igrihe, here with Cinik, who you can find at CINIKRADIO.com. Also, we had Ryan, who you can find at thejimwits.com, and Kim, who you can find at KMCArtworks.com. Great artists. Go check out some really cool stuff. We'll be back next week with some new stuff for you, probably some news as well. Send your crazy news stories, any comments, questions, and concerns to us at CINIKRADIO@gmail.com. Find us on the internet at CINIKRADIO.com. Look for us on Facebook at Facebook.com/CINIKRADIO. Find us on Twitter at CINIKRADIO. And find us on Instagram at CINIKRADIO. You can also head over to tpublic.com, search for Cinik, CINIK, and get your own Cinik Radio podcast gear. T-shirts, mugs, cups, stickers, all the cool Cinik Radio podcast stuff you could possibly want. It'd help the show, and we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for all the love and support. Keep listening, sharing it with your friends, like, listen, and subscribe. And until next time, don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at CINIKRADIO.com. Available for download on iTunes.